It's a bit. Oh, yeah. Good morning, everybody. And welcome to this session, Beyond Consultation, to collaboration and meaningful engagement with people, with Indigenous peoples. My name's Chelsea Huggett. I'm from WaterAid Australia, but today I'm here to represent the Australian Water Partnership, who have really led the development of this session in collaboration with the Australia Government's Department of Environment, Energy, Climate Change and Water. We've got a fantastic session planned for you this morning. We've got an incredible all-women panel, as you'll see here. And I know you've probably heard them speak throughout the conference and have been really inspired. So I'm really excited to hear from all of you this morning and as we close the conference today. To get us started this morning, I'm delighted to introduce Inga Axio Albinson, the president of the Stockholm Sami Association, who'll do a welcome to country as we gather here this morning on Sami country. Inga.
Okay. It's always difficult to be a little bit small. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Okay. Such an honor doing this. So we acknowledge the Sami people traditionally and currently living in Sápmi, the indigenous territory that is much greater than the drawn maps from the national state. So it's including the actual land, the capital, and the whole country of Sweden, where there are Sami living all over the place. And we also acknowledge the indigenous people that are present here today. Thank you for your effort to come here and pay respects to we pay respect to your territories as well, and give you the greetings for you and your ancestors. We indigenous people are guardians of life and biodiversity in our inherited land. We know that whatever happens to the land and the water, it also happens to the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Inga. And I think for many who've met Inga throughout the week, thank you for making all of us feel so welcome, and really for the efforts that Inga and her colleagues at the Stockholm Sami Association have made to really build this Indigenous presence and participation here at Stockholm World Water Week. So for this morning, we've got a really wonderful mix of speakers here with our all-women panel. It's going to be a really powerful discussion. The format is that we'll hear from each speaker for about 10 minutes to give us some insights into how Indigenous participation, meaningful engagement has been led either from a government perspective or an Indigenous communities perspective. And then towards the end, we'll have time to have a discussion with all of us here today. So please do think of questions, comments as you hear from each of the speakers. And at the end, we'll have about half an hour to talk together. So we're going to start by hearing from our colleagues from the United States. Lorelei Cloud, who many of you may have heard speak at the conference this week, is an incredibly inspiring speaker. Lorelei joined the Colorado Water Conservation Board in March 2023 as the first tribal council member to serve in the position. So Cloud is the vice chair of the Southern Ute Tribal Council. She joined the board at a critical time for water, not just in Colorado, but right across the American West. As the representative for the San Miguel, Dolores, and San Juan drainage basin, she represents land that covers not just Southern Ute and Ute Mountain reservations, but also 10 counties across southwestern Colorado. Lorelei is a true advocate for the Ute language, traditions, and culture, actively participating in events and traditional gatherings. She's very passionate about helping youth, women, and elders. Following Lorelei, we'll hear from Commissioner Tootin. Camille Kamlimlin Tootin was confirmed by the US Senate in 2021 as the 24th Commissioner for the Bureau of Reclamation. Prior to her appointment as Deputy Commissioner, she served as professional staff for the US House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. She was the staff lead on the resiliency provisions enacted as part of the Water Resources Development Act of 2020. Commissioner Tootin's congressional experience also includes serving as a professional staff for Interior Authorization Committees, the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and the House Natural Resources Committee. She also serves as the Interior's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science. So I'll hand over to Lorelei and Commissioner Tootin.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? It's not working.
Hello?
Oh,
There we go.
all right. Good morning, everyone. I know it's been a long week for everyone, but thank you for being here. Thank you for attending this session. I think it's really important to also support all of our women in these roles. But I want to give you a little bit of history of why it's important for myself and for Commissioner Tootin to be here. Because in some of the history is in 1922, the Colorado River Compact was created and signed and put into action. But tribes were left out of those conversations. It wasn't until 2 years later that Native Americans became citizens in the United States. So it's one reason why we were left out of those conversations, but there's a whole host of other reasons as well too. But moving forward into what we're doing now, so we haven't been included in a lot of the conversations that were going on in that time frame. And in 2019, the 10 Tribes Partnership did a tribal water study in conjunction with the Bureau of Reclamation. And in that study, it basically told everything that we had already knew, that 10 out of 30 tribes had allocations of the river that were between 20 and 30% of the entire river system. It's the 20 to 30% is I say that because a lot of the tribes at that time hadn't had their water settled. And so we knew that that number was going to be increasing. And so now we're finally starting to gain way into having a seat in the conversations that we're currently in now. But there's still a long ways to go. And so having tribes in all of these conversations is really important because these decisions affect us and we should be included in those conversations. And so changing the way that we think about water and who's included in those conversations, again, is really important. So that's why the two of us are sitting here. And in the way that we're changing these is, the tribal perspective is really important because we've been stewards of the land and water for time immemorial. We've been the caretakers, and we've had this innate a knowledge of who we are, and that all of that comes from what Creator gave us, and that's the land and the water, the air, all the different elements. And so that's what makes up who we are as people. And so having us included in those discussions has helped us to create, in the Upper Colorado River Commission, it's governed by the 4 states, the 4 representatives. It's called the Upper Colorado River Commission. And there's 6 tribes in the upper basin. And what we did is, historically, there was no conversations between the states and the tribes when it came to water. But 2 years ago, we started some conversations held by my tribe was the first to host those meetings. And what we did, after 2 years, we came up with a memorandum of understanding, which means that the 4 upper basin states and the 6 upper basin tribes, which means 10 sovereigns, came together and we agreed, we committed. The commitment is really important. We committed to continue working together, having those conversations forever, basically. But we did that because we knew that leadership would always change, and we didn't want to somewhere along the lines for those conversations just to kind of fade away. Those conversations were important. So that commitment is really important in that memorandum of understanding, saying that we commit to continue talking to each other, because for 100 years that has never happened. 100 years, can you imagine? Tribes owned and have the allocations of a large amount of the water, and those conversations never happened. So also with that, what has also happened is a lot of relationships have developed, particularly between tribes and the Bureau of Reclamation. And we know on my reservation, I have Bureau of Indian Affairs basically controls a lot of the water and the water infrastructure. And I have a project on my reservations called the Pine River Irrigation Project. This project is 175 miles of a canal system. It serves water to both tribal and non-tribal because my reservation is what they call is a checkerboard checkerboard reservation. So I have all different sites of land ownership, but basically it's tribal and non-tribal all in one section of land. And this water system delivers both water to both tribal and non-tribal members. It's owned and operated by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but they haven't maintained the system since the 1960s. And so it's severely dilapidated. But every year, every single water user pays an O&M fee, basically for water that they've never received since the 1960s. And because of this infrastructure, it's in really, really bad condition. And thank goodness with our relationship that we built with Commissioner Tootin, she actually came out, she saw what was going on, but she also understands that the Bureau of Reclamation, because they're also an arm of the federal government, they also have a trust responsibility to the indigenous population, and they also should be, their main priority should be tribal interests. But because of that, we were able to get $3 million for some of the infrastructure to fix some of the weirs on the infrastructure to be able to bring the water levels up so that it can deliver water to certain sections. It doesn't fix the entire section or the entire infrastructure. It's a small portion, but it's enough for us to get water to where the areas that are really needed. And so there's still a lot of progress or still a lot of things that need to happen in order for us to create more progress to better provide more benefits, not just to the tribal members, but to all the water users on that system. And so it's a small step, but it was a very important step as well too. And that was because of the collaboration and knowing that we have to work together in order to find a sustainable solution, not just in the Colorado River system, but for each one of the tribes, because every tribe has a different situation. Every tribe has different problems that they deal with, challenges that they deal with their water and getting water delivered. My reservation is no different. I have tribal members that also have to haul water to their homes because there's not an infrastructure to be able to deliver to their homes depending on where they live. And so there's many challenges to what we deal with on our reservation, but we finally are starting to have some wins and some progress in delivering some water to our people. Our people are who we are. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my people. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is a commitment to be here at 9 a.m. on the last day, so I want to thank you all first for being here. It's been an incredible week to be part of the global conversation on water, to have made new friends and seen so many of our friends now. And so it's an honor to be here with you, Vice Chair Cloud, with our friends here from Australia and New Zealand and all of you this morning. I'm Camille Klimlim Tootin. I serve as the Commissioner for the Bureau of Reclamation within the department, or I think it's called internationally, within the Ministry of Interior. The Department of Interior is led by the first ever cabinet Indigenous woman on the cabinet for the President, Secretary Deb Haaland. So on behalf of Secretary Haaland, it really is a wonderful privilege to talk about our work. So when you think about the Bureau of Reclamation within the United States, I would zoom in, and if you look at a map of the United States, find the most eastern part of Texas and draw a line all the way up to Canada. That roughly would get you to what is called the 100th meridian. And so what that is where it really shifts from a wetter hydrology to a drier part of the United States. And so when we were founded in 1902, 120 2 years ago, it was with the mission to deliver water and produce power. And today we serve the American West. We are the largest water deliverer in the United States and the second largest producer of hydropower. And when you look at the landscape and what we are talking about today, the Colorado River, as a focal point, that serves 40 million people from the municipalities of Denver, Colorado, all the way down to Los Angeles, California. It serves, it is the home of 30 sovereign nations who have called it their home since time immemorial. And it has nearly 5 million acres of irrigated agriculture. So it is a very important part of the Western United States and the country as a whole. From a reclamation perspective, in the 17 Western states that we operate, there are nearly 300 sovereign nations, and we provide water to 1 in 5 Western farmers. So if you have eaten almonds from California or apples from Washington State, there are so many values. Seen the lights of Las Vegas, which is where I am from. Those are the values and products that we help to provide to the nation. So when we walked into the door with the Biden-Harris administration, we were looking at an incredible time and challenge from several levels. First, we were still in the midst of the pandemic. We also recognize now that we were looking at what would be some of the worst hydrology that we have operated within the history of our organization. But we were also given an incredible opportunity in resources from President Biden's Investing in America agenda, both with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. So it was really a transformative time to be able to lean in with our people, also rely on the partnerships and make stronger bonds, but also as part of that, bring investments to bear. And so there's a couple of ways in which reclamation has really been able to engage from a sovereign to sovereign relationship. One is showing up. And one of the things that I'm incredibly proud of and have the privilege of doing is being invited to your homelands. And so we have been out within the American West. I've had the privilege of standing next to you, next to the Pine River Irrigation Project, to see where the weirs are going to go and understand what the rivers mean to these communities. Chair Flores, who's in the audience here today, said yesterday on our panel, she is the river. And when we were together, you could see what that means. And if you are able to at least understand, I think that is a step one, and showing up is the biggest step. The other part of this is in the relationship is being able to listen. When we went through these processes as we're engaging on the Colorado River, part of this is we have a formal government-to-government consultation process. And so within the process that we had on a short term, as well as we're engaging on operations for the next decade or so, we have engaged in 50 government-to-government consultations on the Colorado River alone with the 30 sovereign nations. But that's not the only time you talk to your partners. I am very fortunate to be able to have a relationship that I believe will transcend this position with Vice Chair Cloud and other leaders in the basin. You need to be able to have the formal consultation process, but also just have a relationship where they can pick up the phone and tell you the good and the bad. And when you get the phone call about the challenges, that's when I know that we're doing right, because they have the trust to share that we need to work through things together. It is hard to hear sometimes, but it matters. And then you double down with the tools that you can bring. And so for us, that is technical expertise, that is taking into account what operations mean for our projects to their homelands, and also bringing investments to the table that we've been given. And so within the Inflation Reduction Act, we were given $4 billion to deal with drought, and with a priority on the Colorado River. We've already allocated half of that within the Colorado River. And what you can see now as a result is that 2 years ago, we hit the lowest level since filling of Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States. It's right outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. The facility that abuts that is Hoover Dam. And today we are 20 feet higher. That is part of record conservation in the Colorado River Basin from every single sector, from every single community, as well as our partnership with the country of Mexico. We've done similar efforts in the upper basin. So the Colorado River Basin is split into two, but it's one basin. And have those efforts to also rebound Lake Powell, which is a sister reservoir in the upper basin, up to 40 feet. And we've been able to show that we can do more with less, that it's a proof of concept in light of climate change and aridification, and to be able to do it together. And so as we're looking forward, as we're looking at what the future looks like for the American West, it is relying very much on each other to get in a shared commitment to a vision of the future that my daughters could be proud of. And as we look to make these decisions, it really first starts with a level of respect for one another, an ability to listen, especially when it's hard, and then to bring every tool to the table as we move forward. So again, it's just an incredible privilege to be with all of you today, to be able to share what we've learned in the Colorado River, and also to learn from all of you as we tackle on this global issue that impacts every single human on this earth. So thank you very much for the time and an invitation to join today.
Thank you so much, Lorelei and Commissioner Tootin. I think you'll all agree we have so much to learn from the Colorado Basin, and to have both of your perspectives here together is really helpful for other countries. What I forgot to say in my introduction that Commissioner Tootin explained quite well is that today we're going to hear from the United States, New Zealand, and Australia to really give some different perspectives of how nations and tribes in different countries are collaborating together with government. So our next speaker, I'm very excited to introduce, is Erina Wetene. So Erina Wetene is an Indigenous Māori woman. She's from the Waikato iwi in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Raised along the Waikato River, Erina combines her deep community ties with robust technical experience in freshwater management. Erina engages extensively at the intersection of policy, Mātiaronga Māori, and science. She serves in several governance roles, including as a Crown-appointed board member of the Waikato River Authority, an alternate director for the Tiwai Māori Trust, and a board member of the Ngāpaiti Maratonga. Additionally, Erina works as an independent consultant specialising in Indigenous perspective, freshwater management, and the restoration of tauranga species. Māori ora.
Kia ora, mōrena. Just wait for my presentation to load. Oh, yeah. As Chelsea said, I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm from the Waikato tribe. And before I kick off, I just wanted to make a few acknowledgements. Firstly, to the Sami people, thank you for your hospitality and for hosting us on your traditional lands. It's always a privilege to come and spend time with you all. Secondly, I wanted to acknowledge all of the Indigenous brothers and sisters who have travelled from around the globe to share their knowledge and stories with us. I feel super inspired. I'm going to take some of those lessons home back to New Zealand. Thirdly, thanks to AWP and the Australian Government for supporting my attendance here today. Thanks for that. Heaps of thank yous. Thank you all for joining in person and online. It's wonderful to be with you all. And also thanks to the panellists. Feel super privileged to be alongside this panel. And last but not least, a shout out to Phil, Brad, Sucheta, Singh, Malika and Michelle, the OGs. Hope to see you here next year. Right, ko Taupiri te maunga. So Taupiri is my mountain. Indigenous people, they introduce themselves by their, I guess by their environment. So ko Waikato te awa, Waikato is my river. Ko Waikato te iwi, so Waikato is my tribe. I'm one of 80,000 tribal members in my tribe, and we have 68 marae, and my marae is on the bottom right, Te Papo Rotu marae, and it's on the banks of the Waipaha River. Ko Irina Aho, so that's me, hanging out with tuna, which are going to be the topic of my presentation today. So tuna are freshwater eels, and they're super significant for my tribe. Aside from the things in the introduction, I'm a mum of 3, and my kids have been in, on, under, around our river since before they could talk. So when we say that the river is part of our identity, it really is part of our identity. And as Auntie said the other day, ko au ko te awa ko au, I am the river is me. So whether or not the kids are harvesting food, so that could be whitebait or freshwater eels, or whether they're part of traditional ceremonies. Both of my sons are paddlers on our king's wakataua, or his ceremonial war canoes. They start out as 6-year-olds, they get to go on the waka and they're like bailing, they're the bailers in the waka. But as they grow, they are allowed to step up and get a paddle and be actual paddlers now. And then my daughter, she's part of the Wakaama team. That was her earlier this year at the Wakaama Nationals. So that's a big sport in Aotearoa, and of course globally as well. And I had to put her in this presentation as well. And then they won, so I had to put that one in too. So, so anyway, getting on to the presentation. The theme of this talk was beyond consultation, and so that's what I'm going to focus on next. But before I can get to talking about beyond consultation or beyond engagement, I had to give a little brief outline of our history. I'll try not to dwell there because that will take all day. And then touch briefly on our 2 treaty settlements, and then get into the tuna management example, which is where we've gone beyond in terms of our consultation, and quickly share some of our lessons learned. So our history is, I've heard it actually in a few other presentations, so it's quite similar in other countries as well. But for my tribe, so our tribe, tribal lands were confiscated in 1865. So the British Crown invaded our tribal territories and confiscated 1.2 million acres of our lands, and for our tribe it was a double blow, because not only were the lands confiscated, but our river was confiscated as well. And so from that point forward, I thought I'd have a screen up here, but now I have to kind of look down there, so excuse me looking down. We were excluded from decision making, our rights and interests were removed, and it kicked off an intergenerational search for redress and justice. So again, I'm skipping right to the end. It took 130 years before we reached a land settlement. That happened in 1995 between our tribe and the New Zealand government, and it had a number of redress mechanisms, including an apology from Queen Elizabeth. So that's the apology of, like the Queen Elizabeth of the UK signed the actual apology to our tribe. She only did that in one settlement, which was ours. It took another 15 years to get to the river settlement. So we achieved a river settlement in 2010, and I was part of the small technical team that helped our co-negotiators at that time. Again, there were a number of redress mechanisms in that, and I don't have time to go into them all, but Of interest in this presentation, because it's a fisheries presentation, was we had the ability to create our own fisheries regulations and bylaws, which we've utilised moving forward. So getting into the example, this is where 5 of the tribes along the Waikato River joined together to work together around tuna habitat restoration. So tuna, for us, the eels are part of the river, it's not separate. The beds, the banks, the plants, the water, everything is all part of the river. So when we talk about the tuna, we're still talking about the river. So as I mentioned, the freshwater eels are super significant for us as Māori, pretty much across the country actually, because we didn't have kangaroos like Phil or buffaloes like Lorelei. So it was our access to tuna that pretty much kept us alive in some times. And our marae or villages kind of followed access to these tuna fishing grounds, so they're super important to us. Just think that they're like big with fur or something, I don't know, that jokes. But now, the current state of tuna, the endemic species that's only found in Aotearoa is currently considered at risk and decline. So there's a real push to try and restore and protect our treasured taonga species. That eel, dried up eel there was at the back of my place. One of the lakes dried up during summer. I think the dam or the weir busted, and then we went in to try and save as many as we could, but we couldn't save them all. So our poor eels are definitely at risk, and so we're wanting to work together to save our tuna. A little bit more about the river context. So the Waikato River, where I'm from, it's the longest river in New Zealand. It starts off beautiful and clean at Taupo. You might have heard of Lake Taupo, maybe not. By the time you get to the mouth at Port Waikato, it's severely degraded. We have hydro dams, we have a lot of agricultural activity, we have towns drawing on the water supply. There's a whole lot of things affecting our river. As I mentioned, we have 5 tribes that are settled along our river, and in 2022, the environmental managers of each of those tribes got together. They all like doing their own thing as well. There's that autonomy sort of aspect, like don't tell me what to do in my part of the river. But then there's also the part about how about we work together and put the interests of tuna first. What might that look like? Oops. So we had a bit of a workshop together to kind of explore if they even wanted to work together, because it wasn't a given that they would. We were just like, hey, our tuna need our help. Do we want to kind of join up and work together on this, or are we going to just carry on doing our little bits? End of the hui, after some difficult, courageous conversations, we decided that yes, actually we do want to work together. And then we went through an activity of kind of developing our strategy. And so at that point, like 30 different ideas got literally chucked on that table. And we were like, we're a small group, we can't do all of that. So we're going to have to prioritise what things we're going to focus on. And so they focused on 5 key activities. And the first activity was to take back the alva trap and transfer program at Karapiro. So Karapiro is one of the hydro dams, and alvas, the baby eels, hit the dam and they can't go on any further. So the commercial eelers were looking after that activity, and they were shifting the eels around for their own commercial gains. And so all of the river tribes were like, nah, we've had enough of that. We also had a bit of a site visit while we were developing our strategy. Just quickly moving on. These were their aspirations as determined by them, by nobody else, just by the river iwi. So as you can see, number 1 was Karapiro Alva Trap and Transfer Program. But then once you put the alvas above the dam, they have to get back out. So the other priority was to get the big migrant eels back down, because eels spawn in the ocean, so they have to go 2,000 kilometres away from Aotearoa to spawn. So just because we put them up there, we have to take them back out. Third part was around information sharing across our river. The 4th part was habitat restoration. The 5th part was building relationships across. Trying to go fast, sorry, I'm running out of time. This is Karapiro, the dam, our hydro dam. That trap and transfer program had been in place since 1992. This is our little video, please. Video. Oh. Yeah.
In the old days, we used to supply a lot of tuna to all the pokai, but we can't do that anymore. We're lucky to just put enough tuna on our own pokai tables at the moment.
We're starting to lose that knowledge of how to catch the tuna, how to respect the tuna. We can't even put a kai of tuna on the table for hui. Within 2 generations, we've lost that knowledge, and we want to stop that rot, I suppose, and reconnect our people back to the tuna. That's why we're doing this work.
This is the first year that under the Waikato Tainui cultural harvest, we have been enabled to take control of the trap and transfer process that we've been undertaking this morning. And it's caused a few ruffles, you know, with the commercial fishers, but it's awesome because now we can start to show them how we can do it better for the betterment of the tuna and the people, but more for the tuna.
Our biggest concern has been that it's been controlled mainly from a commercial perspective. So bringing it back to our people, reconnecting our people to their tuna, to their taonga, is probably one of the most important things for us.
So what happens is the alvas actually swim upstream from the estuaries, but then they get stuck here at the dam. So we take these alvas and we put them into tributaries and the lakes of Waikato to ensure that they go, thrive, you know, sustenance for the iwi, not only for the iwi but for the future generations as well. Part of this process here, we have to, you know, we lift the traps over the week, store them until we get that 50, 60 kilo, and then we transfer them in our bins, but we also have to sort of monitor what we're putting in to the lakes and all the tributaries up here. So we do species compositions, identifying what species we're actually transferring. We'll take 100 tuna and split them off into their different species, long fin, short fin, just so we know what we're catching here. We know exactly what we're putting in there. So once they're gone under, they'll stop moving and then they look dead. And then we'll chuck them under the scope and then we'll split them off.
Witnessing what we did this morning, I was standing there sort of watching, you know, the whānau and everyone being around, you know, the whakawhanaungatanga that comes with this kind of mahi, I think is just as important as preserving the taonga.
For this mahi rangatira, you know, for Ngāti Kōriki Kahikura, and our pātere ko arapuni te rohi o te tuna. Te rohi o te tuna e. So we try and uphold that, and so we sustain our tunas to the best that we can, moaki tunu, so our kids know, you know, our uri, our mokopuna can continue to eat tuna at the table.
Cool. And then I'll back onto the presentation, thanks. And so when we took over, we didn't just put them into the upper hydro lakes like had been done for the last 30 years. We actually put them in other parts of the catchment where they weren't behind barriers. So we you know, it's not rocket science, but nobody had done it before. But because we were enabled under our own regulations and authority, so the commercial fishers, they also needed to get a permit from the Ministry of Fisheries. We wrote our own permit under our own legislation to do this activity. And through that, we were able to decide where those alvas went. And we worked with people on the ground, whānau on the ground. So this is, I guess, my example of beyond consultation. And there are a couple of other slides in there, but I know we're running out of time, so I'll just quickly say that it was quite meaningful for the people that were at the release site, so it was quite spiritual. Like at times there were definitely a few tears that they were looking after these fish. It's about intergenerational transfer of knowledge. We had 2 loads of school kids turn up, 2 bus loads of school kids come. When the commercial guys were doing it, was one man would back up to the lake and let the fish out, and that was it. These are the other priorities that we're working on, but I'm going to skip through to the end just to allow more time for the discussion. But yeah, this is our why. This is why we do it, is so that our knowledge and practices are maintained. I'll go back one. Continue with our practices, beliefs and mātauranga, our knowledge, and then these are some of the lessons that we learned. One, we know that there are other ways of knowing, being and doing. We can be innovative. We don't have to be locked in certain ways of behaving. We're not going anywhere. We've been here since time immemorial, which you might have heard a few times. There's incredible outcomes when you have Indigenous-led approaches. Our approach prioritised collective decision-making, autonomy, self-determination and empowering iwi to manage their resources. And there's a growing body of examples internationally where this is in play. And we do have allies, like we work with the dam operators and that, but we don't centre them and they don't centre themselves. They're happy to support from behind and the back, which is cool. And we have other support as well, which is cool. And lastly, tips for our collaborators, which you've heard before: connect, listen, collaborate, co-create, resource and empower. You can let go if whānau want you to let go. So anyway, that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erina. And I think you'll all agree there's some themes already coming out from our first speakers around having courageous and difficult conversations. And I think, I don't know about you, but I feel like I just went to the Waikato River and really was part of the fisheries work you're doing. It's quite incredible to see the water leadership that Indigenous women bring to this space when we create those pathways. So now we're going to move to the our Australia colleagues. We're going to go on a trip to Queensland. Kay Blades is our first speaker. Kay is a Manandangi woman who descends from the Werribone family of the southwest region in Queensland. Since retiring in 2023, you don't seem like you're retired to me, Kay. Kay now channels more of her time, passion and efforts into Aboriginal water interests, which began some 12 years ago in the northern part of the Murray-Darling Basin. Kay actively leads and participates in on-country projects that incorporate First Nations knowledge, leadership, self-determination and rights in water modelling and waterway assessments. Kay is a member of Australia's Committee on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Water Interests, the Murray-Darling Basin Steering Group and the Cultural Advisory Group, and the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies Human Ethics Research Committee. Kay's continued involvement on advisory committees and projects showcases a tireless commitment to the well-being and representation of First Nations peoples, solidifying her status as a respected figure in the realms of government service, Indigenous advocacy, and environmental stewardship. Kay will be followed by Assistant Secretary Cheryl Hedges, Head of the First Nations Water Branch within the Australian Government Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. A proud Walbunja Aboriginal woman, Cheryl brings a unique perspective, unparalleled dedication, and a wealth of experience to her role as a leader and advocate for First Nations communities. Cheryl is actively engaged in shaping policies and initiatives aimed at improving water access, management, and ownership for First Nations individuals in Australia. I'll hand over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of this land that we meet on today, the Sami people. Thank you for your warm welcome, and I'd like to pay respects to elders past and present, for it's their wisdom and strength that drives people today. And I'd like to acknowledge my elders as well. Without them, I would be nothing. We're here today to talk about beyond consultation to collaboration and meaningful engagement. As I've been introduced, my name is Kay Blades. I'm a recognised traditional owner and custodian within the Manandangi Nation. I joined the Committee on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Water Interests at the beginning of this year, 2024. The committee, referred to as Kawi, are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have a deep knowledge and understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and cultures. We have water expertise, and we have community engagement expertise. And we're not appointed based on our own nation. CAWI was founded in 2020 to provide advice to the Australian governments that are state, territory and federal on First Nations water reform matters to ensure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's water rights, interests and perspectives are included. We aim to elevate the cultural, spiritual, social, economic and environmental interests of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples within Australia's water policies, programs and legislation. Ultimately, CAWI aims to ensure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have enduring access to, ownership of and management of water. I'm here today to share my experiences of engaging and being engaged with Australia's water management and policy development and my insights for advancing the integration of Indigenous wisdom and genuine movement towards self-determined management of water. So to provide you with some context as to the complex nature of First Nations engagement in Australia, the image you see on the screen gives you an idea of how many First Nation language groups are in Australia. We are not one group, but hundreds. And we have distinct languages, histories and cultural traditions. CAWI members and I recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been excluded from being able to practice our obligations and our customs around water. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples own and control less than 0.2% of surface water entitlements in Australia. As an independent body, we as CAWI do not represent any government, and we're able to provide frank and bold advice to the different governments relevant to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's water interests occurring across Australia. While we play our role in advising government, CAWI takes great care not to represent, speak or act on behalf of any one individual nation, organisation or community group. CAWI developed the Insights paper, which contains Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, ICIP, and is underpinned by the principle of free, prior and informed consent in relation to ICIP, as set out in the United Nations Declaration on, did I say United Nations? Yeah. Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I thought I said United States then, sorry. The Insights paper sets out 5 principles and their recommended actions to encourage governments to consider when planning for, engaging in and developing national water reform initiatives. The 5 principles are: water and land in all their forms are interconnected living entities. Self-determination is protected, defined and realised in water management. Protection of Indigenous cultural intellectual property and knowledge. Recognition of water rights and interests, and enduring access to healthy, quality water. Moving forward, Australia has a world-leading opportunity to elevate and recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's water rights, interests and values across several national water initiatives. In Australia, this includes the renewal of the National Water Initiative, the evaluation of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and establishing a national Closing the Gap inland waters target. Yeah. So now I'd like to share just a little about 2 projects that have been carried out in my country to showcase how my family and I are engaging and being engaged by both government and non-government to advance the integration of Aboriginal wisdom. This project was a research project funded by Queensland's Department of Environment, Science and Innovation and was led by myself in collaboration with local Aboriginal rangers, a strategic design company and a water and environmental science company. The project asked the question, how can First Nations knowledge help make better land and water management decisions? We used a water modelling tool, a tool that's used by scientists, planners and government to tell us how much water flowed in and out of an important cultural water site for Manandangi people, where and when it flows and how these flows might be good or bad for people, for animals, plants and the environment. Of course, the results were what Manandangi and the local Aboriginal rangers already knew about the changes that had happened for this site. However, now we as traditional owners and custodians can use technical water models to demonstrate how changes to water inflows and outflows help or hurt a water place. We as Manandangi now have a Western science technical report that supports what we've been saying for a long, long time. So we can go to our partners and our stakeholders and say, if you don't listen to my oral stories and my knowledge and understanding, here's the Western science to back it up. The story is covered. The next project is the Aboriginal Waterways Assessment. It's a tool developed by Aboriginal people for Aboriginal people. The process of completing an Aboriginal waterway assessment involves preparation, fieldwork, analysis and reporting. Again, I led this project with family up there on the screen. Which was funded by Queensland's Department of Environment, Science and Innovation, and we collaborated with that department and a natural resource management group. The data collected for our Aboriginal waterways assessment captured our cultural values and cultural uses, along with the health and well-being of our river. AWAs can align with the principles and priorities of a nature-positive plan. Plans such as co-designing and co-implementing solutions, respecting and valuing Indigenous rights and interests, and enhancing biodiversity and ecosystems. We, as the traditional owners and custodians, applied leadership and self-determination throughout this project from start to finish. An AWA provides robust, culturally relevant data to influence the decisions and actions of other stakeholders and partners, and they also provide a platform for intergenerational and intercultural learning, knowledge exchange, and relationship building. So, to wrap things up and to move beyond consultation to collaboration and meaningful engagement, I give you 3 take-home messages. Number 1, pair Indigenous knowledge systems with Western science. Number 2, embed Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous leadership for nature repair. Number 3, elevate Indigenous water interests for cultural, social, spiritual, economic, environmental needs. Thank you.
It's going to be pretty hard to follow all these amazing women, but I'm going to do my best. I would like to echo Kay's acknowledgement of country and to extend that also to our young people. I always give a shout out to our young people. Some of our young people have been lost, but they're now finding their way so that they can learn from the elders and become really strong, wise people of the future when they are ready and wanting to do those particular things. So Walawani Yindawan, Jamaga Yindawan. That means safe journeys, everyone, and I hope you are all well. In my language, the Duraga language, we don't have a word for hello or goodbye. We always say Walawani, so have a safe journey here and have a safe journey home. So my nation's Mujungal totem is the black dark Umbara, and my personal Mujungal is the Jidi, which is a willy wagtail. I'm not quite sure if you have a willy wagtail in any of your countries, but it's a really garish, flaps its tail around, very chatty, and my grandmother gave me to that because she recognised that I am a talker. Oh, one too far. There we go. All right, so first and foremost, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have never ceded our country. Our country is our land, our water, our skies, our spirit. But when Australia was colonised, it was done so on the premise of terra and aquas nullius. No one's land, no one's water. But when it comes to water in Australia, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, that's women's business. But it's really important that in the concept of aqua nullius, it's actually denying us the existence of our own water governance principles. And these principles were laid down through our customary first laws, and we should be trying to carry out our customary laws through our songlines, through our trade routes and our ceremony, and that's been denied to us. And part of our water governance is about reciprocal actions and sharing. We don't want to do anything on our country, our waters, that is going to impact upon our nations downstream or indeed even upstream from there. And so those rivers and aquifers and our wetlands, they're critical actually to our collective survival and our health. So my branch, in my introduction, through policies and programs, we're looking to reverse the effects of that colonialisation, God, that's a difficult word to say, and that responsibility that's been laid out because of that terra and aqua nullius kind of process. And we want to make sure that everything that we do is to transfer from government decision-making so that the decision makers and the co-designers are in the hands of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I always try and do that through the 4 priority reform lens under Closing the Gap, and I'll come to that a little bit later on. So in Australia, there are many barriers and enablers that could be considered to better support those outcomes for our nations relating to water rights and also to that broader financial and economic issues with that and they often intersect with unconscious bias and systemic inequities. And there's a number of barriers listed on the screen, but where there are barriers, if we flip that narrative to a strength-based approach, we can actually turn them into opportunities. And so, you know, I'd encourage you to consider whenever you do have that barriers, where are those opportunities that we can flip that to provide better outcomes. So, but when we are looking at flipping those barriers around, we should always be looking at through the principle of nothing about us without us. We don't want people making decisions for us. We want to be the decision makers from there. So everything that I do in government is trying to encourage that kind of focus so that we can shift the way that we're doing business from a government perspective. So it's about supporting actions, policies and processes that promote that community self-determination, because that's going to lead to better and more sustainable outcomes. So it's about doing this through meaningful community engagement, and that ensures that the community has a voice right from the start, throughout and at the end of any of those processes. And we should be looking from a government perspective for ultimately to have no government hands or fingerprints on any of the processes and decisions and implementation, so that it is truly in the hands of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So one of the things you may have heard me talk about, for those who've listened to me before, and I know everybody at home gets sick of me saying this, but it's true, we need to engage and consult at the pace of trust. And this refers to the idea that the speed at which we progress or decisions are made and our relationships or our partnerships are formed, particularly when we're looking at collaborative work, it should be guided by that level of trust that has been established between the parties involved in those discussions and processes. In other words, it talks about the pace of trust suggesting that actions, decisions and progress should occur at a speed that aligns with how trust has been built. And in contexts involving our nations and indeed Indigenous peoples across Australia, it emphasises that moving too quickly without first establishing that trust can undermine the relationships and the success of the outcome that we are all trying to achieve. It takes time to build trust, but it's really easy to lose really quickly. So it's really important to maintain that communication, be consistent, have that respect, and then if you have that, then that pace of trust will ensure that all these elements are prioritised over rushing to meet a deadline or objectives. And we've heard that consistently throughout a number of presentations throughout this Water Week. So it's about that sustainable and meaningful outcomes that are more likely when they have that pace of trust, respecting each other's positions. So once you have that pace of trust established, then it's looking about pathways to empowering. So we have two, as the Australian Government, we have two overarching priorities that we are trying to achieve for our First Nations in the water space. And you heard Kay talk about providing access to and ownership and management of water across Australia. And it's also increasing our nations and our people's participation across all levels of decision making. And these are supported by a number of different policies and program work at a national water reform process. And so in the next couple of slides, I'm just going to talk quickly about a couple of those initiatives, but it's also designed to have that continuously owned water and that continuous ownership happening. So in the Murray-Darling Basin, which is Australia's biggest agricultural bowl, it's $1 billion water market process. And as Kay said, across Australia, our mob only own 0.19% of surface water. And this Murray-Darling Basin crosses 5 states of Australia. There's over 50 nations that coexist within the nation on their traditional lands. It's a highly regulated and it supports that $1 billion water program. So owning water entitlements because of that regulation within the basin is primarily linked to land ownership. Most of our mob in the basin do not own land. And so that's already, because it's been decoupled, is another barrier to that. And so one of the things that the Australian Government is looking to do is we're providing $100 million to purchase water entitlements for those First Nations peoples in the basin. And you might think, wow, $100 million is really great. It is great as the first drop in a ripple effect that we're hoping to create across the basin. But when you're talking about $1 billion market, $100 million is not a lot, but it's a start. And we hear a lot from our Aboriginal people across the basin that owning water is their way out of poverty across the basin, and that's pretty critical steps. So, a couple of things that the Australian Government is doing to support First Nation self-determination to hold that water and purchase that water is we've held a number of gatherings and symposiums where we've had our nations come together so that we can hear from them how they would like the water to be purchased, how they would like the enduring model to be established, how they would like to manage it. And we're not looking to determine this yesterday. If you want to have meaningful engagement and collaboration, it takes time. And we're spending the time to do that. And that could take up to 18 months to 2 years to do that. But meanwhile, if we take that time, our purchasing power of our $100 million gets reduced because the market prices change. So we know that in the last 5 years, what we could have bought in 2018 when the first initial money was provided, we've had an opportunity cost loss of 54%. And that's a lot of lost money when the water hasn't actually been purchased at that time. So one of the things that we heard as part of our consultation was this idea or the desire to have a purchasing framework that could provide connectivity of water across all of the basin, but underpinned by the opportunity to create wealth from the water entitlements, so through temporary trading and other activities through that market. And secondly, we heard that they wanted equal distribution of funds and the benefits between the north and the south of the basin. We too have a north and south basin, even though it's all one basin, but the water systems are very different and the geography is very different across that too. where the southern basin has a lot more water flowing and easier to trade in water, whereas the north geographically is a lot drier and it's not as predictive in terms of the water availability up there. So, as I said, there's a lot more engagement that needs to be undertaken because we want to now go through and determine, now that we know what type of water wants to be purchased, we need to work through what the enduring holding mechanism is going to be at the end of the day when it's physically handed over and designed and implemented for and managed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So what nations told us at that time is because we didn't want to reduce or have any more impact on that opportunity cost loss, is that they wanted to put a temporary process in place to start purchasing the water entitlements now while we're working through the next 12, 18 months to determine what the holding mechanism is. So we've actually established a hybrid approach between government and the First Nations in the basin, where we have an interim governance process put up. We have an advisory group that have been independently recruited to provide to develop principles, policies and protocols, and that's then to be provided to a directorate who is like a mini board who will be the purchasing deciders for those particular entitlements. Because that sits, the government will be purchasing the water entitlements, we have to have a government representative on that directorate. Thank you. 1 minute, wow, that's not enough. I'm going to keep going. So we've now I've lost my train of thought. Anyway, we've got this interim governance arrangement, and the whole idea is that at the end of that, we will be handing that completely over for the nations when that is set up. I'm going to skip through the Cowie stuff because Kay has already touched upon that. And I'm also happy to share the slides later on if anybody would like that. Well, look, one of the biggest things that we have in Australia, and I'll stop on this because I do have some more things to do, but I'll stop on this, is that we have a national agreement on closing the gap, which is designed to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous situations or what's happening across Australia. Things like reducing infant mortality, increasing our age differences, reducing incarceration of our people. But one of the things that we do have under there is an inland water target, which is designed to increase again that water ownership by Aboriginal people. It's meant to be a national target, but we found that because the water systems that are managed across Australia are very different across states and territories, that we couldn't come up with a national target. And it would be wrong to do that because in some states you can own water, in other states you can only hold licences. So just in recent times, I've been collaborating with our coalition of peaks, which are peak Aboriginal organisations across Australia and at the state level, and all our state and territory governments, supported by Kay and the committee, to have these discussions to go down a pathway now of a jurisdiction by jurisdiction approach. And that's actually going to be a lot more powerful because when you get down to that state level, the governments are not going to be making the decision on what the baseline is, what the target is, how they're going to put actions and implement it. It has to be agreed in partnership with their relevant Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations at their state-based level. And so the idea is that not only are we going to look towards physical holdings of water or licences, but we're also looking at those enabling processes, which will be the policies, the water literacy, the programs, the repurposing, everything that you would need to do to empower our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be ready to hold water and then manage that for however they would like to manage that. So I do also have a couple of takeaways, which I will just skip right through to the end. Oh, actually, I'm just going to bypass this. Sorry. I'm going to go back. So the one thing that I wanted to really draw out is the lens in which I always try and focus my work in government, and I encourage other government departments too, is we have these 4 priority reforms. And the first one is about having formal partnerships and shared decision-making and co-design between governments and Aboriginal organisations and peoples. The second one is about building the community control sector, and so that's, again, supporting that capacity building so that mobs out there can be ready if they need to and when they're ready to be able to take the work forward. The third one is about transforming the way that governments do business. That's the big one that government really struggles with. And the fourth one is about making sure that data and information is available at the local level, relevant to the local level, so that First Nations people have that information to be able to support their cultural understanding and move forward on that. And from a government perspective, if we don't let go, Erin, you said that too, wherever you are, if governments don't let go, then there's never ever going to be that opportunity for our mobs to step into the space where they need to be and want to be and should be. And so just lastly, on that, those key takeaways is that in addition to those ones up there, from a government perspective, don't be afraid to make a mistake as long as it's not death-defying, killing kind of things. If you don't know, ask. Ask your nations. They are happy to talk with, and we should be listening for that. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Every little bit can make a difference. And lastly, for governments, if nothing changes, if we change nothing. And so it's really important that we do that. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Kay, and thank you, Cheryl. And I think you've given us some really interesting food for thought. I loved Kay's frank and bold advice. I thought that was a great takeaway, and Cheryl, the pace of trust as well. We've come to the part of the session where we get to hear from all of you. I did have a question to kick us off, but I'm actually going to open it up to the audience instead to hear from some of you. And Phil, I can see your hand is up there. We've got a roving mic and a volunteer to help us. Oh, but we need this mic for the panel. So, yeah.
To Cheryl, and the Australian water market is $330 billion, conservatively speaking. The closing the gap inland target is 3%. What is the strategy and the pathway to achieving that 3%, and how is it going to be resourced? Because it's a lot of money.
We'll actually feel that 3% has been rescinded by the Joint Council at its July meeting, primarily because they recognised that a national target wasn't going to be achieved. So that's where that state-by-state based one is now going to happen, and it'll be a bit more empowering because it'll be nations deciding at that jurisdictional level.
That's good to know, because water allocations are a state jurisdictional responsibility.
Yeah. We might go this question here and then Alex.
Hi, I'm Sharon Megdal from the United States. Thank you all for great comments and presentations, all very meaningful. I have two questions for the Australian, and that is, number one, from the little bit I've learned over a period of time, correct me if I'm, or state it for maybe everybody here who's not familiar, including me, I think you have these kind of rights, but then you have allocations based on the flows at a given time. My real question is, are these purchases forever purchases? So that's the one question. And then the second question that's somewhat related is, what happens if the money goes away because of a later government? Like, is this an enduring solution? Lorelei started out with the endurance of the new arrangements in the Upper Basin. So I'm really asking about the level of ownership, if you might call it that, and the endurance of that.
Thanks, Sharon. So in the Murray-Darling Basin, if you purchase a water entitlement, it's yours until you decide you don't want it or sell it. You can temporarily trade an allocation that's linked to your water entitlement, and that's a way of creating wealth from there. So a water entitlement is like owning a house. So you have your house, you can rent your house out if you wanted to get income, or you can sell your house if you want to dispose of that. But in terms of each water year, our water year is from the 1st of July each year, you are allocated water against your water entitlement. And depending on the type of water entitlement that you have will depend on the level of allocation that you get. So if you buy a high security water entitlement, which is big bucks, it means that when you're water allocated, you're more likely to get the full amount of allocation for that. If you have a low reliability, then you might not, which is cheaper to buy, but you might not. But the allocation is determined on the forecast of water availability for that year ahead. And so it's really important that anybody who has that water entitlement would treat it like any other stock home. You'd kind of consider about what's the best thing for you. In terms of your second question relating to the money availability, that $100 million is committed and it will go through until we actually spend that and can purchase or hand it over to the enduring model once that's set up. We've had subsequent different governments in and they've remained committed to those funds. But what we want to do is make sure that we take the time to have that engagement to make sure we get it right, but we don't want to take too long that it's still tempting for governments to do things. And we want to make sure one of the things that we always talk about is future-proofing whatever actions and activities that we do in that space.
I saw another hand. Yeah, sure, Alex.
Alec Rolston from Gordon Institute for Water Research in Australia. Thanks very much for some wonderful presentations. Found them absolutely fascinating. I've attended quite a number of Indigenous-led presentations throughout this week, and we've heard a lot about time, the time that it takes to engage appropriately, the time it takes to build trust. But unfortunately, as we all know, Western funding timeframes often don't allow for the appropriate time to build that trust and to move beyond engagement through to true collaboration and partnerships and beyond. So how do we bridge that gap between the Western timeframes and the times that are needed to move beyond consultation and collaboration?
I'm happy to take that question first. First, I think engagements at all levels of your organization is important so that you have continuity, not just with leadership for us in Washington, D.C., but within our regional offices in the regions and then also down to the area office manager level. So engagement throughout the organization allows for that level. Being respectful of the sovereign leader's time, too. I work on water. They work on everything that they'll remind us, like water, transportation, healthcare. And so recognizing that when you have an ask, to be able to be efficient about what that might be or what the expectation would be for engagement. And finally, meeting people where they are. What I've been taught and what I've seen is if you've met with one tribe, one sovereign nation, you've met with one. And so a good example of that is the funding opportunity that we released earlier this year. It's a notice of funding opportunity that we were able to utilize with the Inflation Reduction Act that looks at several different aspects. Some tribes are at the very technical stage. They need to build up their technical capability. Some tribes are ready to start writing that engineering report. Some tribes are ready to build. And so we committed $300 million exclusively for tribes in the Western United States to look at all of those factors on how, for projects that bring drinking water to their communities. But an important threshold that we also heard is that many of our projects are congressionally statute to have a cost share. This one, we had the flexibility to almost limit or eliminate a cost share, which could also be a barrier for some of the tribal communities we serve. So it's really all of government being able to be flexible about those needs that people have, and then again, deploying it as quickly as possible.
Does anyone else want to build on that response?
Yeah, I would recommend to you that you be bold and push the boundaries and you push back the timelines. Be the warrior and say, this is not enough time. Drive that message. If we don't push the boundaries and make change, then we just keep falling back to the same old. Enough time is not given to get great outcomes.
And from my perspective, I think it's not really a shortcut, but actually bringing people from the community into the team, so you can hit the ground running. So they'll already have the existing relationships in place. So, but you don't want to be shortcutting the process. But I'm just saying that's another way of speeding up, I guess.
And also when it comes to respecting the nations, it's also having the understanding that these are sovereign nations, particularly in the United States. And so each one of these tribes, you know, they govern themselves. They have sometimes they have the capacity to like for staffing or whatnot, but you also have need to have the understanding that a lot of these tribes still deal with historical traumas, having their treaties broken, having their data exploited, having their people exploited. And so that trust that you want to build will take time because of the trust that has been broken over centuries. And so that also is part of their decision making as well too, because tribes want to protect their people. They want to protect their data because that information has been used in the name of science, and there's been no reciprocity given back to the tribes. And so there, again, you have to understand why tribes don't have trust, particularly with governments and NGOs.
So important. Are there other questions to build on or comments or reflections to share? Please.
To Lorelei's comment is, oh, sorry. I'm Amelia Flores, chairwoman of Colorado River Indian Tribes. Yeah, this is what the last day, and I'm running almost on empty right now. But just wanted to say what Lorelei said about the trust and building on that trust. And she mentioned the trauma. We have to work on the trauma, the healing part to that trauma. But you're talking about 500 nations in the United States of the healing that needs to come. I think Secretary Hallen has started part of that with the boarding schools, but there's all other issues that we need healing from. And hopefully we can start working on the healing process within the government and the nations. Thank you for letting me make that comment.
Yeah, that needs that truth telling. So today we've heard Indigenous perspectives and water policy perspectives from the Colorado Basin, the Waikato River, and the Murray-Darling Basin in Australia. And I just want to say, as a non-Indigenous woman working in the water space, I recognise that I benefit from a colonised system, that it's important for me to be an ally to Indigenous voices and help support and really move towards that genuine collaboration. And so in closing, I'd like to ask our panellists one final question and to share some takeaways for the audience, but to really share with us, and you all touched on this in your presentations, of what does self-determination look like, either from an Indigenous perspective or a government perspective, and any final closing remarks for the audience.
So since I have the microphone, I'll go first. What that means to me is basically we're able to govern ourselves. But honestly, we have been doing that since time immemorial. And so the colonialized view of our self-determination, that's basically putting on a label on what we've been doing for a long time. They wanted us to act and be like them, for having a formal governance. But we've been doing that. We've been governing our people since we were created by Creator. And so the new concept of having this formal governance really is being able to govern ourselves. We're a sovereign nation. There is a parentalized view of Native Americans, particularly in the United States, and we're treated like children of the government. And we should no longer be treated that way. That whole type of thinking really needs to stop. Again, We have been governing ourselves since time immemorial, and we know how to do that. We've been doing that for such a long time, just like we've been caring for Mother Nature since time immemorial. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And again, what an honor to be on this panel. Oftentimes when you're in this space, you think that your part of the world is the center of the world. And what this shows too is that there is so much commonality between all of us and how we can solve these issues. And it also feels a little lighter to be taking on these challenges with colleagues like you. What self-determination is, I mean, first it's, as leaders, there's a responsibility to own decisions that were made before you and to be able to move forward in the path of making things a little bit better. And so leading with a level of respect, understanding where you can do things better, and also being able to see decisions, especially as a partner and as a trustee to sovereign nations, with the light of that knowledge. And so when we look at people, partnerships, and investments as a strategy for reclamation, that means showing up, listening, and acting, but also doing it together. And so whether it's the Colorado River system or any other system in the United States or the world, I think leading with those core principles and first off, leading with respect is an important one to self-determination across the places that we work. So thank you.
Just echoing the sentiments, it's been a real honour to be a part of this panel. I guess the scale is really different, like tiny Aotearoa versus the big states, but thank you for having me here. In terms of takeaways, there have been a lot throughout the session, and I think for me, I'll go to a different pathway, and that's recognising that Indigenous knowledge is valuable in and of itself. Like, it doesn't need to be verified by science or any other way. I just want people to take that away. Another thing is that when Indigenous people are empowered, their knowledge is empowered, and they're resourced adequately, you can get amazing outcomes. So that's my takeaway. Kia ora.
For me, genuine decision making over our land and our waters and over our lives. Yeah, that's my takeaway message for you.
Ditto, 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 pace of trust.
It's really incredible and really inspiring, and I think you've given us so much to think about and to take back into our own roles and our own personal lives as well. Thank you all for joining very early on the final day. We need some help to put this room back together. We need to put all the tables and chairs, so if you can spare 5 minutes to chat as you do it, that would be wonderful. Thank you again to our incredible all-women panel.
I was writing notes from Erica when you gave your very quick takeaway. What was your quick takeaway? What is it that you said? We want to take a picture. Oh, sorry. Is it possible to get a picture after? I'll get a photo. You guys?